Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Thursday morning, so hopefully everybody had enough time to get their questions in. So let's jump in and see what we got. First up, Michael Conchilo has a Genesis Model 2 sitting on top of a Model 1 Sega CD. It works fine that way, of course, but as far as they could tell, there was never a solution for the ugly underhang where the left side of the CD unit juts out well beyond the Genesis unit. They know they could swap for a Model 1 Genesis or a Model 2 CD, but it's their childhood tower of power. Yeah, the mushroom is there too, and they want to keep both together. Does anybody in the community know of a solution either for sale or just modeled up so that they could 3D print it? They'd be happy with anything really, from a simple black plastic cover to a wild Sega-themed diorama. So that's a great question. I actually reached out to Greg from Laser Bear to see if he'd worked on anything like that. And he said he thought it was a good idea too, and he would look into it, but Greg's pretty swamped, so I'm not sure if there's going to be a product coming out of that or if there is anything else out there. So my first question is to everybody listening. Does anybody know of a design like that floating around that Michael could just print? But also, if not, and you're a 3D print enthusiast and you feel like doing this stuff, what creative things can you come up with? Could it just simply be a controller holder? That might be neat because there's probably just enough space to put two controllers in there, maybe. What about cartridges? So you could put loose cartridges or stuff, maybe just a couple for like your ROM cart, Sega CD RAM cart, whatever, just to have something up there. Or more importantly, what do some of the way more creative than me people listening have to think about this? Are there any neat ideas out there? And also, if there is a 3D printed design, is there a way to get it so that we could make it a little thicker and then sand it down and paint it so it just looks like a completely stock adapter that Sega would have injection molded back in the 90s? I don't know. I love this question, Michael, because this is one of those fun things where we get both nerdy creativity and technical creativity at the same time. So please chime in if anybody has any ideas or if you already have any designs available. Next up, Lloyd Smart is soon getting an Ironclad DX for their Mister setup and is wondering how to connect it to their SVS, Artemis's scalable video switch. So I checked the product page for the Ironclad DX, and it looks like there's both a Sega Saturn mini DIN style connector for audio and video output, as well as a HD15 D-sub VGA style output. I'm just going to call it VGA style because that's what most people know it as. But from the RGB-S, so the RGB output point of view, they should just be identical because you're routing red, green, blue in sync to both connectors. So which connector to use is just going to come down to what's easiest for you. You mentioned having an SVS, so if you already have a VGA input module, just use a shielded VGA cable. If you don't have an extra one, but you do have an extra SCART module available, grab a Sega Saturn SCART cable. But as far as quality differences, RGB quality would be identical through both as long as shielded cables are used. So just to break that down even simpler, if you're using some garbage AliExpress Sega Saturn cable and a quality VGA cable with a quality audio cable as well, and when I say quality, I don't mean expensive, just a standard shielded set of cables, then the VGA output is going to look way better. Now, on the flip side, if you use a really nice Sega Saturn shielded cable, a SCART cable, versus some garbage VGA unshielded cable next to an unshielded audio cable, the video is going to look terrible and the audio is going to have a lot of hum. The RGB and audio output all come down to shielding on the cable, and that should be the only difference. If they claim one is better than the other, then they may have routed the board wrong because that should not be a thing. But I don't think that's the case. As long as both connectors are populated, you should just be able to use whichever one works best for you. Now, the advantage of the Saturn Mini DIN is that with the same connector, you would get access to RGB SCART as well as composite video and S-video. And it looks like they built in the passive Luma trap that Mike S designed right into that. So you should be able to get native composite, S-video, and RGB out the same way you could with any high-quality Mister setup. So that's definitely an advantage for some people. But in the case of you have an SVS with a couple of extra modules, it's not going to make a difference as long as you have a decently shielded cable. So hopefully that clears things up. Lloyd posted something that was on the D3F mod website, but it doesn't really make sense, so I'm not going to repeat it. I think that might have actually been a mistake, but basically, as long as everything is built correctly and you have both connectors, just use a shielded cable and pick whichever connector is going to be best for your setup. Next up, Tim the Gamer 23 has a question about power supplies for older consoles. They've seen myself and others recommend Triad power supplies, but they've also noticed sometimes I mention there are better, more expensive options out there. Could I elaborate on that, please? They have a Triad for their Genesis and love it. They're just curious what better options are available, ignoring price. Great question. I could give you the overview. I am not the deep dive expert in power supplies, but basically, when it comes to measuring audio and video signals and performance out of these consoles, once you start passing a certain level of quality, there is no difference on the console side. Maybe one will run a little cooler and last, 100 years instead of 90 years or 50 years instead of 40. I don't really know when it comes to that, but we're talking extremes at this point. So in the context of how will I get better performance out of my console, I don't think there are any better options, when you put it in that context. However, there are some Meanwells that tested better, and I think there are a couple other brands that when you really do the deep dive power testing, they're consistently a little bit higher quality, but past the range that would matter for these analog video consoles. I guess maybe a decent analogy might be if you take a hearing test and you have your range of hearing set and you buy speakers that can go much lower and much higher than your range of hearing. They're technically better, but you're not going to hear the difference. So maybe that's power supply experts. Chime in. Did I just make a complete fool of myself, or was that a pretty decent analogy to help people visualize the difference? So when it comes to that, your consoles, the Triads are the ones that I trust because they consistently test equal to or better than the originals, including with MD Fourier testing. However, when it comes to people who are experts, putting them on a scope, doing different power analysis under load, there are better ones out there. It just probably doesn't apply to us. So, experts chime in if I got any of that wrong, but I think that's just a decent overview of it. But it was a great question, Tim. Couple of questions from Space Farmer. First, they recently ran into a good deal for a couple of PVMs. There doesn't seem to be a ton of great BNC to BNC cable options out there. Could they just use BNC to RCA adapters for the 4 outputs from the Extron, use an HD Retrovision cable, and just use an audio line for C-Sync? Yeah, I do that all the time, especially when I'm daisy chaining a bunch of them together for whatever silly project I'm working on. I have a pile of HD Retrovision cables, so I just use those, and they seem to work fine. The most important things is that you have the red, green, and blue matching the red, green, and blue video cables, and you put sync over audio just in case there's any difference. There shouldn't be at all, but just in case, at least you have that isolated to the audio side, and that way if you're running composite video as sync, it's separated like that. But I mean, that's a perfect way to do it. So great question. And that might actually save people money because you could even do something like if you were running audio as well, you could use red, green, and blue and audio from the HD Retrovision cables, and then just get a single shielded cable for sync. And if you're using composite video as sync, you could even do something crazy like use a coax cable that you would have for cable TV that are super fully shielded to not interfere, or just get a single shielded RCA cable. But yeah, absolutely, that should totally work fine. Now, you mentioned that you're going output from the Extron. If you're going into a PVM, that should not be a problem at all. Just remember that whenever you come out, Space Farmer, for you, this probably doesn't apply to you, but for anybody listening, just remember that when you come out of an Extron device, especially like a Crosspoint, and if you go to SCART equipment, you have to have a resistor on the sync line. But going direct to PVMs, double and triple check your service manuals here, but I've never found a standard PVM that wouldn't accept it. Some you have to flip a switch between which termination and which voltage you have, but you should be totally fine. Just double check that. Next question has to do with Copper Dragon's Lumacode signal. After seeing Macho Nacho's recent NES video, they ended up ordering several of those kits for a few different systems. So the Lumacode mods for NES, Commodore 64, Atari 2600, etc. They ordered one RGB to HDMI unit, but do I think the RetroTink 4K could end up seeing support for Lumacode like how the OSSC can translate it? My guess, 100% guess, not checking with Mike, is that it's on his list to add eventually. He just has to go through the priorities of different things and hit them in the order of importance. my total guess right there. However, you could just use that HDMI kit at the moment that you have to send that to the RetroTink 4K, then use the decimation. So maybe set it to 720p or something, decimate by 3 to put it back down to the original, and there you go. You have a 240p signal, and that'll totally work for now. Also, if all of your consoles are close together, you might be able to just get short RCA cables to run the Lumacode mod into like a push button composite video switch, just one of the cheap ones, and then put that into the HDMI mod, the Lumacode version of the HDMI kit, and then just send that to the RetroTink 4K. As long as the total length of cable isn't too long, that should work fine. And the good news is that if it doesn't work, it's not going to damage anything. You'll just get pixelation on the screen or no signal at all. So I think for the price of a super cheap push button switch, you might just give it a try and see what happens. And I'll link to one of the ones that I have here that I've used. A bunch of people commented that they die after a year or two, but I don't know, mine was still working and it was super cheap, so it might be worth looking into just for that. But good questions, and if you end up doing the switch part of things, let us know, and let us know how it works and if you ran into any trouble. Next up, Dan Lavoie wanted to follow up on the conversation from last week about converting component video to composite. And Dan said they're in the camp where they already had an elaborate setup with all of their consoles feeding YPBPR into a crosspoint, and then that feeding into a RetroTink out to an HD TV. So they were thinking about having an unused output from the crosspoint go out to that CRT, but now they understand how each signal might not be easy to convert to composite in the same way. So, right, that I guess what I had said last week ended up being the right advice then, because then you would have to use your crosspoint to do an auto loop from comp to RGB, and then have that RGB to comp, and have that RGB signal go to the converter, and then you'd have to have the converter placed probably near your CRT so that you could easily tweak the potentiometer in order to have good composite video dialed in. So Dan said, given the price of the all-in-one solution, daisy chaining that to another converter, they might almost prefer to pay someone in their area to RGB mod the CRT and add component outputs to it. That would give them a cleaner signal and make the TV more useful in the long run. So I agree with that, but depending on the mod of the CRT, you might not be able to do a component video mod to it. It might only be RGB. But at that point, now you're just talking about using your crosspoint to get to run through a comp to RGB. So that's one device, one set of cables. You don't need to tweak anything. It's going to look phenomenal. So I would definitely say yes to that. If the CRT that you have can't be component video modded, then just grab RGB, and I think you'll be really happy with the end results. I always try to keep price into account with all of this. So depending on what your modder would charge and what other work needs to be done to the CRT, that might be worth it for you, or it might not. I don't know. It totally depends. But I would just kind of look at the overall solution and see what's best. And if that converter ever does come out, I'll definitely be doing at least a live stream on it, demoing it, and of course a post on RetroRGB. So at the moment, either choice of RGB modding the CRT and adding the comp to RGB, or just component video modding it directly would be better. Next up, Double H recently asked ChatGPT for a question about NES wiring, and as it was processing the request, they saw it was looking on consolemods.org as one of its sources, which kind of brought up the idea of, hey, is AI having a negative impact on RetroRGB and the things that I do? And I don't think so, not yet. And in some cases, it might be driving more traffic, but I haven't seen a giant change in traffic since AI has been released. So actually, I haven't seen a giant change in traffic at all. It's usually just a pretty steady number, which is good. That means the people who get all the info they want and don't need any more are moving on, but that also must mean that new people are coming in. So that's pretty cool. But, with this ChatGPT AI stuff has its ups and downs, even for creators. So there's always the negative scenario in which you ask a question and you get wrong answers. And that definitely happens, because I've had a whole bunch of people just come straight out and say, hey, I asked AI this and your website says something different. Why? It's because I actually did the testing and research. I didn't just run an algorithm across 1 million websites and try to slap something together. So that absolutely happens. But When it gives correct info, there's usually two paths people would follow. If it's like, hey, I need a wiring diagram, then they're going to grab that and not come to the site. But that's fine, and I'm guilty of that as well. I actually have never used ChatGPT, and I'm going to keep it that way for as long as possible. But I, over the years, have done web searches many, many times for stuff, and the results pop up for work that I have done that I completely forgot that I did. And I'll just click on the image search and get what I need, like the diagram that I wrote that I forgot that I wrote, or just the info or whatever else, and never actually click on my own website. But in that case, whether it's me or anybody else, you were never going to spend a long time clicking through the website anyway. You just needed your answer and you're going to move on. But in the case where people get their answer, but they're curious, seeing that these things are scanning, consolemods.org and RetroRGB, that might actually drive more traffic to the site in the long run. Because the person that wants more explanation, they just didn't even know where to start, would have actually gotten to the site probably quicker than other methods. So especially if they ended up going down the YouTube rabbit hole and just found whatever awful, awful videos are still out there or still being made about completely wrong info. So, the answer to your question is I don't think it's negatively impacted me yet. It probably will, but at some point. But at the moment, some of the stuff that I work on is so niche that if you scan a whole bunch of websites to try to get the answer, you're going to get mostly wrong info, because up until the point that the people that I have worked with on it started doing their testing, people were just guessing. And that's the way it was throughout all of RetroRGB. It's why I started RetroRGB, is because I spent weeks just going through forums trying to figure out how to get RGB out of my older consoles. And all the info was conflicting. Some of it was plain wrong. So yeah, I think I have a little bit longer to go before AI takes over RetroRGB, but I also think that, as long as we grow with times, it should be okay for stuff like this. I mean, it could very well just take over the world, Skynet style, but it kind of reminds me of when the internet sales thing started to pop up and people like high-end AV shops were all going out of business because they realized they could no longer do a 400% markup on something. Like, what was it? Not Ronco. Ronco were the knives. Runco? Was it Runco? I can't remember what it was, but there was one company that just would rebrand other stuff, add a couple of features, and add a zero to the end of the price. So all of those high-end installers who relied on giant markups all went out of business. But all of the smart ones went, all right, you could go get your TV at Best Buy, but how are you going to integrate it to your setup? How are you going to know what processor to use? Can you even mount it to your wall? And they all changed into being installers and basically like concierge to get this stuff. And in the times that they did sell stuff, people would not really mind the smaller upgrade in price because of everything that you get with it. So while one has nothing to do with the other, I do think that whole general mindset of trying to go along with the changing times, as much as it could apply to you, is probably going to save a lot of stuff like this, because it's still going to require people to do all of the physical hands-on testing and put the information out there in a way where other people, including AI, could understand it and then regurgitate it. So I don't know. I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on that, or if I'm doing something wrong, or if I'm looking at this wrong, let me know. But I do really love what I do, and I love helping people. So I would like to continue to do it as long as I can. So if somebody knows of a way, AI is going to creep up and steal RetroRGB from me, let me know now so I can get ahead of it. Next up, Dustin Mattison wants to know if I have a bucket list of products or other tech items for gaming that I'd consider a holy grail to get my hands on to personally mess around with and review, but know the stars would truly have to align for that to happen, whether it's a financial issue or something else. Dustin's personal one is a real 59 Cadillac Eldorado convertible, but to be honest, not only is finding one within a reasonable price range almost unheard of, the scope of work involved would likely bankrupt most entire small towns if done right. What could they say? They love them shark fin taillights. Yeah, that's a cool car. So I have a couple based on realistic stuff. The first is simply an SNES Game Genie that has the 2 extra Super FX pins on it, just for testing. Now, I've read that they're broken and they don't work right. And while they technically would work with the SNES Mini, there's other stuff involved. And I just think that would be a fun live stream. And it's the one thing I haven't found since starting RetroRGB, almost 15 years ago now or something like that. So I keep running into people at expos that say they have one, and they get my email address and they say they're going to email me, and I never hear from them again. So that's definitely one that I would really like. Even though it's a broken, worthless thing, I still just want to take excellent pictures of it. I want to do a live stream demoing it. And if there's something noteworthy, maybe I make a YouTube short or a super short video on it. But that's one thing that I just thought would be fun, because sometimes I like broken stuff just to kind of see why they were broken. And when I'm done with it, I would gladly give it to a museum or something just to hold as a weird piece of history. But after that, I mean, the only other things that I would love to do for review and testing would be to get, like, the unrealistic one would be to get a bunch of mint condition, flawless RGB monitors across all of the scale of price range, have them all fully recapped and fully calibrated, all in the same room together, and then get a whole bunch of camera equipment in and a bunch of people that truly know how to use it, not just a moron like me that pushes buttons until it looks right, and do a real video of how the differences between each of these look, and do it in very high frame rates, so that way you could kind of break down how it works a little bit, and have an archive and a comparison of how these things might look. But it's not only getting all of that stuff, but shooting the actual footage itself and doing the post-processing work in order to get this to look like it would with your eyes standing in front of it is I actually think that's an equal challenge as to getting the money and the time and all of the parts to do all of this, because it's not just about getting the right camera equipment, which you might need movie style cameras. You might need $100,000 worth or to rent $100,000 worth of equipment to do it, but you need the people on the shooting and post-processing side that could present it in a way where you at least get a sense of what it would be like. And then, of course, you have to watch it on a decent TV anyway. So you might not even ever be able to do that until we get 1,000 hertz OLEDs or something like that, being a little ridiculous. So yeah, that's kind of both sides of it. I had a long list of stuff that I wanted to see over the years, and I've gotten to see basically all of them. Some were very disappointing. Some totally lived up to the hype. But yeah, the realistic one is I just want to try, even if I had borrow one of those crappy broken Game Genies with the Super FX pins. And I don't know why I haven't been able to do that yet. And yeah, the one that's unrealistic is just a whole bunch of monitors and displays, and to somehow get maybe VR footage, I don't know, but just somehow get the experience archived in a way that people will understand the differences, because that's the hardest part of videos like the C4 OLED. I get so many comments like, just buy a CRT, this is dumb. Yeah, that's not the point. Or why would you spend so much money for it to look crappy? Definitely not the point. If you do this right, it's not going to look crappy. It's going to look subjectively better. So I don't know. It's a hard one to get across. And I think if I had better tools and better knowledge on how to do that, I could do it a little bit better. But it also still just comes down to the display people use. So yeah, that's my rambly answer. And anyway, glad that your show went well on Saturday. 25 to 30 folks is a pretty big audience for a comedy show and not a big venue. So congrats. Hope your future shows go just as well. Next up, Demon Koo wants to know if there's a risk to keeping a NAS, a network-attached storage device, close to a CRT, especially with some of the larger 32-inch models when they do a huge degauss after not being powered on for so long. So first, remember that all throughout the 80s and 90s, a standard PC was a box with a CRT directly on top of it. So it's not going to directly damage either one, but good practices are always better than just saying, whatever, it worked in the past, it'll work now. So first of all, if you have a network attached storage with just SSDs, I probably wouldn't worry at all. But if you have one with like 10 mechanical spinning hard drives, yeah, maybe keep that a little farther away from any kind of magnetic fields that might interfere with it, like big speakers, especially unshielded speakers or anything like that. But it's not something I would obsess over. And I think it's absolutely not the same as unshielded speakers next to a CRT. I think that's way more of a safety issue. But if I had a personal choice, like right now, my NAS setup is in the rack that I have here underneath a CRT. There's always CRTs next to it, but there isn't a CRT right on top of it or right next to it. And I've never seen any interference issues. Maybe that means it's like somebody saying I've been smoking for 30 years and I'm still alive. I don't know. But my guess is that there shouldn't be any issues at all. But, if you have the ability to separate them, why not, just in case? But anybody who has any thoughts on this, chime in. Maybe I'm missing something, but I think you should be fine, even if you just put it right underneath, just because otherwise we would have tons and tons of dead hard drives over the years of having them sit directly on top of PCs, or having CRTs sit directly on top of the PC that has the hard drives in them. Next up, Arkanoid is looking for a recommendation for an HDMI switch, and I haven't found any newer ones that could handle 4K 120 that do everything that I would want them to do. So for me personally, my dream HDMI switch would be many inputs and multiple outputs that could have matrix switching involved, that would also allow you to choose which inputs and outputs would pass CEC control, if at all, which ones would pass ARC, if at all, and then also have them be PS3 compatible on all inputs and outputs so that you just don't have to worry about that crap. Because you could obviously get different adapters to make it PS3 compatible. So what would the purpose be of not having it into the Switch anyway? So I don't know. I get why the manufacturers can't just straight up do that, but it's frustrating as a consumer. And I have never found a Switch that could handle all of those things properly. I don't even know if they exist in the super high-end market. The good news is, though, on the flip side of things, if you just want like a 4-in, 1-out, like the StarTech.com one that you linked to, it should just be compatible with absolutely everything. However, you might not be able to pass ARC or CEC control, or you might have to just use it in the confines of that individual switch. So I really would want to go back and do a deep dive on this, but I think I would love to see a homebrew solution. I don't know if that's even possible with the HDMI licensing, but I know that's definitely changing over the years. So we'll see. But I think that would be my dream switch, is to have 10 inputs and 5 outputs, and then be able to control everything about it, including have some auto matrix switching. So if you detect this on that one, go, have it all fully programmable. And I think HD Fury would probably be the company to pull all of that off, because they already have the web interface, the ability to do a lot of these things. They just don't have a high input, high output matrix switch available. And if it was, I would save up and I would actually spend a good amount. I could see myself dropping $500 or maybe a little more on that if it did everything that I needed it to do. I'd save my pennies for a couple of months and try to pick one of those up, but I don't know if anything that like that exists at all. So for your setup, grab any one of them, grab it from a store that allows you to return it, just in case you run into any issues where it doesn't like the Tink and Genlock mode or something like that. It's just one of those things where just make sure you could return it if it does something weird. Bonus question, do I know of any cheap, small, lag-free composite to RGB decoders? They have a bulky Kramer unit, but they're trying to simplify their wiring, and it would be nice if they could use a couple of them so everything could be RGB to the switch without doing any loopback setups. They already do this with 2 component consoles using 2 of Mike's component to RGB adapters. So first and foremost, the context in which you are using these converters is 100% the right one. This isn't magically making Composite or S-Video look like RGB, which you never said that, Arkanoid, but just for anybody who might be curious, this is just simply making it so that you don't have to worry about loopbacks and switching inputs. You just send everything as RGB. The one downside is, are any of these converters, do any of them have really good 3D comb filters for Composite? If not, you could actually get a worse signal than if you just routed it directly through any of your equipment. But I mean, if you're using like an Atari 2600, maybe you just don't care because it's not super high-end graphics anyway. But my answer is no, I actually don't know of any. I just wanted to clarify the scenario that you're using it in the correct scenario. But I don't know of anybody, of anyone that's out there. If anybody makes them, please let me know. I feel like I've tested these before, but who knows? I'm getting old and my memory isn't as solid as it used to be. So maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But I think for a scenario like this, that would absolutely be a cool thing to have. And much like the RGB to composite converter, that's not going to sell thousands and thousands of units, but it would absolutely sell for people like Arkanoid who just want a setup like this. So, or maybe it could even help with certain scaling solutions. I don't know. So if anybody out there has a design, open source or not, please let me know. And I would love to check check it out just for my own curiosity, and we'll kind of just go from there. But no, I don't know of any. Hopefully the people in the chat would be kind enough to help us out with this one. Well, that's it for this week. As always, if you have any questions at all, please just ask wherever it is you support in the latest Q&A post. Very often, all of the questions are only on Patreon, just because that's where the majority of people support. But anybody who supports on any of the services, just please ask the question in the latest post, because I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw today, I just like scrolling through and answering them all laid back as if we were hanging out together somewhere. And as always, thank you to everybody who supports in any way at all, because it really is you who's keeping all of this stuff going. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week.